PowerPoint up here, and I'll go ahead and jump into that. And what this is going to be about is a general interaction. It's by the book, and I will also interact my personal thoughts. Things change over time, experience and studies, and so I will give my personal opinion on some of the stuff and expand on it. But this is by the book, so if you were to do your research yourself, I have summarized it, and I will also interject what I was kind of my thoughts here. So what I'm going to discuss is the aquatic food chain and just how it interacts with the predator-prey relationship. A little bit about myself. I got a Bachelor of Science in Aquatic Biology from Purdue University. I specialize in water quality systems, aquaculture, and studied many different species of fish and what they prefer to eat and their interactions with each other. So also within that, I studied thermal pollution for a utilities company for a year. At the time it was PSI Energy, now it's called Duke Energy. And also got the chance to really see out in the field, just the interaction around cooling plants and that sort. And that was a pretty neat experience. So here's what I've learned over the years, and it's helped me in my tournament fishing. So you have several roles throughout the season. I'm going to break them up into 4 seasons: the spring, summer, fall, and winter. And this is meant to help you understand, how everything interacts together. So you can always go back. We're going to jump into a lot of stuff that I'm using scientific terms. The reason I do that is so you can go back later and hold on one second, Ross. Let me know that I need to share my screen here. How is this? Can you see that now? Share screen. How's that? Is that better? Okay, my apologies. So we're going to go through how this goes through. And what I was getting ready to say is I'm going to use some scientific terms in here. The terms themselves, I'm not meaning to sound like I'm a know-it-all or confuse you. I'm putting this in here so if you're to Google it, you're going to get more specific results if you want to further look at this yourself at your own time. So where I'm going to use the term microbiology, I am going to define this. It's the branch of biology dealing especially with the microscopic forms of life. There's a lot of stuff in the water you simply just can't see, specifically what they call micro and then macrobiology. The micro is the microscopic stuff, specifically phytoplankton and zooplankton. This is the very, very basic of the food chain. It's the most important part. So what I want to point out here is I see a lot of people when I'm guiding, they ask me the question, what are the fish doing? And the simple answer is they're just following the food. They have tails, they want to reproduce, and they want to eat. And occasionally they get scared and they hide, whether it's a weekend, a lot of boat traffic, or what it may be. But if you know what they're eating or what their food is also eating, you're going to easily get narrowed down to where they live. So like I said, phytoplankton and zooplankton. Phytoplankton is nothing more than microscopic plants. Phyto being photosynthesis, plankton being small plant-like, small microscopic. So then you have zooplankton, which is animal-like plankton, and those are what eat on the phytoplankton. So when you look at phytoplankton, here's a couple pictures. They're just photosynthetic plants floating around, whether it's like grass in your lawn or leaves on a tree. It's the same kind of deal, except they're floating around in the water. They're photosynthetic microscopic plants. There you go. This is zooplankton. Now I'm going to get into this later on. I'm going to go ahead and kind of spill the beans on this. These are what minnows and bass and everything, when they hatch out, these are the very first things they'll eat. These are the microscopic plants. This is what they eat on before they even shed their yolk sac. And one thing you'll notice, I'm going to point this out, I'm going to touch base on this later on. On the left is a zooplankton called a rotifer. It is a plankton that's found in clear clean water. And on the right is a plankton called cyclops, which is found in backwater brackish area. So a lot of people, if you've ever wondered when you're smallmouth fishing what a smallmouth thinks a tube is, look at the one on the left, the rotifer. That's what it's the very first meal that bass ever ate was a rotifer. That's a tube. That's when it sees it, you know, as a little 1/4 inch fry, you know, in relativity to when it's 5 pounds and seeing a 4-inch piece of plastic, it thinks it's the same thing. Also, look on the right, a lot of people wonder what a brush hog is. There's your brush hog. That's the first thing a bass has ever eaten. Right there is a cyclops. So when you're fishing backwater areas, you're pitching jig or that sort, you know, they're not real specific bass. You know, if they see it, they'll eat it if they're hungry. So a jig at times will represent a bluegill or represent a crawfish. But you know, when you're flipping that, you have all the tentacles hanging out in dirtier water. That's what they're seeing, you know, what their first meal is. So a lot of people don't think about that. They think on the immediate level of bluegill or shad or whatever it is. But hopefully after this, I kind of help broaden your horizons a little bit. These are microscopic animals. They feed mainly on phytoplankton. However, in some certain instances, they're carnivorous and they will feed on each other. And this is what mainly your baitfish and minnows will feed on. So I'll give you an example. So when you get wind, you're blowing the phytoplankton, which cannot swim against the wind. It's just free floating. In turn, the zooplankton follows it. The shad follows the zooplankton. You have all you can eat buffet, and then the bass and soon will follow after. So you just get a chain reaction. So that's why wind blown areas are typically good. One thing I'm going to throw out here is called blue-green algae. A lot of people will call this a plankton. It's not. It's sometimes categorized as it, but when you get, especially in the summer months, you see them on golf courses, it'll just turn a real nasty greenish blue and it has a horrible smell. Makes your water taste horrible. And this is what this is. It's not plant-like, so zooplankton will not eat it. It will boost in the numbers of it, population of it, when there's phosphorus or any sort of runoff or just natural growth. So a lot of times in rainy years, you're going to see this a lot. So don't be surprised if by the end of the summer, your local lake, your local pond gets a little bit of this going on. It's a natural process, but it also can cause an oxygen drop. If the system is to crash, it will break down and will absorb oxygen. And what that is you know, just the decaying process, create a film on the surface and it won't allow oxygen to enter the water. And it could cause a fish kill. And so these smaller, you see golf courses and stuff that use agitators and fountains and stuff like that. This is to battle the blue-green algae. So a lot of people, you know, wonder about that. There you go. So you'll get a lot of that. You'll see a lot more of that this year because of the rain, and that's pretty common. So into the bait fish. So we have pretty simple. They eat zooplankton and they just follow the food. They're just like how bass follow shad. Zooplankton or shad are following zooplankton. Zooplankton swim around much like schools of shad. You just can't see them. At times when it's really windy, you'll see this brown froth on the water. What you're seeing in many cases is just the buildup of zooplankton. So in any given area, you're going to have 3 different kinds of species. They're in 2 categories. You got your herrings and your minnows. In most cases, your herring is going to be what you're targeting. However, your minnows will play a role. A lot of people in the early spring throw shad wraps. Believe it or not, you're not really mimicking a shad. Your shad really don't pull up till later, you know, later on once the water warms up. But when the water's still really cold and you're catching fish in shad wrap and the number 5 shad wrap, you're actually mimicking the minnow. That's what they're feeding on mostly. So when you're looking at the minnows, they pull in first. Usually spawn around 59 degrees right before the bass do. And just that's what it is. Minnows, what it is. You can look up spot tail and fathead. Those are the two main ones. So then you also have herring. This is kind of a neat one because a lot of people, especially in the north and canyon deeper lakes, they don't realize they have alewife, and they do. And alewife in sense will act much like a blueback. And these guys are different than your typical gizzard shad or your threadfin shad. And the fact that they actually like sunlight, they're opposite. When it's sunny, they like to come to the surface and group up, whereas shad species, threadfin and gizzards, they like to do that more when it's cloudy. And then when it's sunny, the shad go sit in a brush pile or something, whereas these guys will be on the surface when it's sunny, and then when it's cloudy, they like to go to the bottom. So it's kind of they're a little bit different, but alewife is the natural freshwater version, and there's really not a whole lot of difference except kind of a little bit on their spawning cycles, but how they look is almost identical. So, you know, if you go up north and a lot of these smallmouth places, you have alewife that look just like blueback. So if you're looking for a good lure and, you know, you see a color of a lure that's called blueback, don't be afraid to try it because they look identical. The only difference is if you, one way to identify species of fish is when you cut their gut open, their internal liner will be speckled or white or black. In the scientific world, this one has a white gut. The blueback has a black gut. The difference is the blueback is native to saltwater, can live in freshwater, and so a lot of these places they've made their way into freshwater or even been introduced. Lake Murray, where I live, they're one of the main predominant forages. So alewife is typical to the north, and they spawn typically, you know, March and April when the water's, you know, 59 to 63. And this is by the book. Now, one thing I'll point out too after the bluebacks, but the bluebacks are a little bit warmer water species, typically 69 to 75. But what I was going to point out is this is what the book says. March and April, and that's a pretty definitive time. I don't, in the world of fishing, I don't tend to be very definitive. In years there's a lot of rain, a lot of times this will be postponed, and at times even be prolonged. And what you look at are these surface temperatures, you know, 69 to 75 or 59 to 63. And after April, true, the water's warmer than that. But if you've ever been swimming on a lake in, you know, May or June or even July, you go down 10 foot and that water temperature can drop 10 degrees. Well, on Murray, these bluebacks, they'll spawn all the way till August. And what they do is they'll spawn shallow in that April to May. And then as by June and July, they're spawning out there to 12 to 15 foot range. And that's a lot of, especially when you get to the shad, it's the same concept. A lot of people think like Kentucky Lake, oh, fish go deep. Well, really what it is a shad spawn taking place in the shell bars. You know, they'll take place, you know, around those full moons, especially when it gets well. You know, first full moon in June and also a little bit in July. Then after that, they start coming back shallow again as the length of day starts getting shorter. But, you know, they're not quote unquote deep. You know, they'll go sit at the bottom of the ledge, you know, on Kentucky Lake, Tennessee River, until that first shad spawn takes place. But for most part, most of your bass, you know, as far as largemouth goes, are getting caught in that top 10 foot. Once you get into spotted bass, they'll be a little deeper, and, you know, smallmouth even deeper yet, mainly because the water clarity that they live in. So just, you know, kind of think outside the box on that. Is think of their ambient surroundings. You know, 10 foot down, 15 foot down, they'll be spawning in June and July. Not a problem. Just, you know, target those places. They both feed on zooplankton. They both spawn on hard bottoms. You know, sand, rock, seawalls. If you head down at, you know, places, get into shad like to spawn on cypress trees. Anything that's the hardest thing in the area, it doesn't really matter. These fish are typically they don't position on rock. They're open water fish. So when they pull into an area, they'll just pull into any area that's in the vicinity, and they'll just find the hardest thing and spawn against it, whether it's a dock or seawall or, you know, something hard bottom. They will roam a little bit. So if there's 5 points and the one point has more rock, that's the one they'll be on. And here's a controversy that I've heard several times in the bluebacks, is that they spawn at the same time that the bass fry are present, compete with the fry for zooplankton. You know, zooplankton, I don't think I've ever heard of a lake running out of zooplankton. You know, they're so plentiful. I don't think you could possibly eliminate all the zooplankton in any given lake. I guess it is possible, but it would have to be through some sort of outside influence like chemical or you know, other than the natural process. So in most cases too, your bass are going to spawn in pockets in mostly, you know, protected areas. Your bluebacks are going to spawn on points. So, you know, that's always been a controversy. I've heard that come up several times. Yeah, there might be some overlap, but I'm gonna go on a limb and say there's not much. And that's just my personal opinion. Maybe there's studies out there, but I'm gonna say just for the mere fact that they spawn in different places and there's just so much ample amount of zooplankton in the lake. I don't think that's ever a problem. Here is something too about, you know, I get the question, there's a lot of lakes in the southeast that have bluebacks. You know, will they survive on this lake like Wiley, or will they survive on you know, Greenwood or Watery, or you know, some of these places they try to put them in, and they tried to put them in, some people, and some illegally, some I'm sure the DNR may have tried, and they just haven't taken. The reason is just like stripers always got to be moving because they're high oxygen fish. You put them in the live well, that's why they die a lot. You know, bluebacks, you know, have kind of a cork to them too. I think they require a little higher oxygen, and when they get sediment in the water, they just can't get what they need, and so they just don't like brackish water. They don't like that. So you probably will never see blueback herring in Santee Cooper, which is downriver from Murray. Just probably will never happen because they would die. Herring in gizzard shad versus threadfin. So gizzard shad they get huge. A lot of people use these for striper fishing around here. They spawn typically after the bass. This is Mother Nature's way of kind of providing for the bass once they come off their spawn, to give them something to eat. There are at times where you'll have bass pre-spawn feeding on a shad spawn. Again, that's something I want to point out is nothing is a definitive series of events. It's a fluid you know, interaction. And so if a bass is a late spawner, I've seen that this year on Murray, don't be surprised if you have pre-spawn fish, you know, chasing topwater on a shad spawn. It happens. So don't think that just because there's a topwater bite or a shad spawn going on, the bass are done spawning. Just try to think outside the box. Don't use definitives. Threadfin, these are a little smaller guys. They do get big. They're more current driven, you know, usually in rivers and streams and that sort. Gizzards tend to live more around open water, and also, you know, they like more stagnant water. If you got kind of a pocket where there's not a lot of flow, it's probably a gizzard shad. And gizzard shad, it seems like your bigger fish following them, even though they can't eat them at times. I think their eyes are bigger than their stomach, so you'll have that a lot. Then you have your crayfish. If you haven't seen the 2 prior webinars that I've done, I go into great depth in those 2 webinars. I get a lot of questions about these on colors and species and such. I'm just going to touch base right here, but if you do have additional questions, you can either email me, Facebook me, or take a look at those 2 webinars. Might be beneficial. What do they eat? Again, zooplankton. They eat each other, and then diatoms, which are phytoplankton that live in the dirt when they have to. So these guys are the garbage men of the underwater world. You know, stuff that's on the bottom. If there's a shad spawn, or if there's schooling fish and there's, you know, carcasses laid on the bottom, or if there's a fish kill, you cannot kill these things. It's almost impossible to kill crayfish unless you just pour a bunch of chlorine in the water, or it's a chemical spill of some sort. They can live outside of water as long as their gills are wet. Once they dry off, they kind of run into some problems there. But these guys are pretty hardy. Biggest misconceptions about crawfish or crayfish. Crayfish is a technical term. Crawfish is a slang term. So if you're going to Google some stuff, crayfish is probably going to get you more hits. But there's only one kind. They all look the same. That's incorrect. I'll show you some pictures. They change color when they molt. That's incorrect. I'll show you some more pictures. And they molt on full moons. That's mostly correct. The tie-in there is the full moon brings increased levels of ultraviolet light at night. When that happens, you get a kickstart of phytoplankton growing because there's more photosynthetic stuff going on. The zooplankton populations will boom, and the crayfish will go in eating frenzy. And they'll eat, and then they'll outgrow themselves, and they have an exoskeleton, and they have to molt. So usually about the 3rd or 4th day after the peak of the full moon is usually when they molt, when that's all kind of getting on the backside. So that's kind of why, the same reason why shad pull up on full moon and they get going. The exception to that is if you get a full moon time frame where it's cloudy for 4 days or 5 days, then you're not going to get that kick start that you normally would. So it depends if there's clear nights or not. If there's not clear nights, it ain't going to happen. Also, the juveniles are typically only going to molt. They'll molt every moon, like I said, but the adults is what I meant to say. They'll typically only molt twice a year when they first come out in the spring and when they go in. So if you're fishing a molt pattern, post full moon, make sure you downsize a little bit. Throw just like a 2.5 or 3 inch jig or something like that. Another misconception, they only live around rock. They live everywhere. There's different species for different substrates. And then another misconception, they're all orange because that's what it looked like when the bass coughed it up. I get that a lot where people say, yeah, the crawfish are orange. And, the bass coughed it up in my live well, they're all orange. Well, that's rigor mortis setting in. That's when they die, they're not getting oxygen to their blood. And so what happens is they turn orange. Just like people turn blue when they're starving for oxygen or whatever it be. It's the same thing with them. They'll turn from a bright green to a bright orange when they die. So don't think that's the case. Here's a picture of a bucket of crawfish. And a lot of these are the same species. You'll see the red ones are the adults of one species. And then you'll see a lot of these green ones. You'll see some orange ones that have been out for a while. There's 2 or 3 different species in here, and I'll go into a little bit greater detail right here. So in any given area, there's typically at least 5 species and 3 genus. There's really only 2 that matter when you're bass fishing. At times, I've run into the 3rd one, which is the middle one here, called Procambarus, on river systems like the Ohio River or Mississippi River. You just got to have a big current area. They're more live around muck. You'll get them around swamp areas. But the Procambarus, which pro means modified, so modified Procambarus lives around clay. You're going to run into him a lot. That's if you ever ate Cajun style food, that's what you're eating. They turn bright red when you cook them. But they typically will, when they're adolescent, they'll mimic the Orconectes, which live around rock. They'll live around them a lot of times, and then once they get too big and easy to find, they'll go ahead and start making burrows, and that's when they bring on the orange pigmentation. That's where I get to the you are what you eat. I'll go on a little bit of tangent here. I learned this in college. If you ever notice on a zoo, the flamingos in a zoo are white, and then the flamingos in the wild are pink. The reason is the flamingos in the wild eat shrimp, and the ones in the zoo, it's too expensive to feed them shrimp, so they feed them squid. So they do the same thing. They kind of carry on the pigmentation. Crawfish, what they do is they'll sift through that clay, eating the diatoms, a little microscopic zooplankton and such during the winter months, and they carry on inadvertently ingest that clay and end up getting that red tint. So again, the little guys, if they don't have to, they won't burrow, and they'll maintain that green color. So this is one right here that he's probably been out for, looks like about a month or so. He's kind of darkened up. They'll get a tan just like you and I get once they're outdoors a little bit. When he comes out, he's bright red. but once he is out for 3 or 4 weeks, he'll start turning into a maroon, some cases even a black, and then the red underneath will transition into an orange color. So one thing to consider, matching crankbait colors or jig colors if you're into that. So here's a juvenile of the same guy, and he's mimicking a lot of the Orconectes. They look a lot alike, and you'll see some of the red tips on their claws. What that is it's a vitamin A indicator. So when they get red tips, they're getting a lot of vitamin A in their diet. That vitamin A comes from greens. Again, they're eating zooplankton, and they're getting a little bit of salad in the process. The zooplankton's living on the grass or plant growth or whatever there may be, and they're in the process ingesting some plants and greens, and they're getting some vitamins, so they'll get more red in their diet. So a lot of times when the clearer the water is, the more grass growth you get, so the more red tips they have. Well, also the clearer the water is, the more washed out their body is, the more watermelon color they'll be. So that's why watermelon red flake is such a good color in clear lakes and also the summer. But when you look at on the other end of the spectrum, in the winter, when it's vitamin A deficient and you have a lot of runoff and not much light penetration and it's dirty, you'll get brown and blue, or black and blue will be a good combination because they'll have a real dark body and they'll get blue tips. In some cases, you'll have clear water and there just won't be any plant growth. I see this in a lot of the Missouri lakes, high elevation lakes in general, or flood control lakes, to where it is clear water, but for whatever reason, there's not a lot of plant growth, and they'll still maintain that blue look and kind of a milky, pale body. So, like a watermelon in blue, or even a pumpkin in blue, which people call peanut butter and jelly. Jig it really is effective. So just kind of keep that in mind. That's why and how they turn their colors. The Procambarus are chimney builders. If you see like in muck, they have these chimneys with little stacks up. A lot of people think they're snake holes, but they're actually crawfish holes. So the Procambarus will also do that, but the Procambarus especially will do that. And so here, I'll show you a picture of them. They typically only come out 3 months of the year. They're very prehistoric looking. They have all body and not much of a tail at all. There's just not much of a need for it, I guess. They're not swimming a whole lot, and they mostly live in the muck. And so they don't get a whole lot of sun, and they're kind of more of an olive color. There's been times on the Mississippi River and Ohio River where I've used olive colored jigs, and that has been the key, and it's because of this crayfish right here. There's the Orconectes typically live around rock. They're the only crayfish to have adult species that stay out year round, mainly because there's nothing to burrow in. They try to get behind rocks. That's about it. I went through the shades of the red and blue on the prior slide, and here's another example of one that's vitamin A deficient, and he's got a greener back, but this was taken in the winter, going into the spring, and the grass growth hadn't quite started yet, and you can see he's got purple claws. Here's one that's midsummer. He's getting the red. The grass is starting to grow pretty well. He's got a nice green and brown look to him. Simple color to match that would be a green pumpkin. He's got some red in it. He's got some little bit of blue in it. That's your watermelon candy color right there. You got a little bit of everything coming on. So that's why watermelon candy is a good color, late spring, early summer, especially in environments where you have fish transitioning, you have rock, or, you have, good current, good vegetation, and some clarity. So, you can get creative on your jig colors if you're tying jigs. Throw a little bit of, 3 or 4 strands of this, 3 or 4 strands of that, something to kind of mix it up. Here's another guy. You can tell there's been some runoff here, and it'll take sometimes just like a week or 2 for you to lose your tan. Same thing with them. It may take just a couple of weeks before they change colors. This guy here, he's mainly brown, matching kind of the dirty water, and his claws are vitamin A deficient. They're a nice kind of a teal blue look to them. So on the crawfish, again, this is not a definitive. This is what the books say. This can change, you know, based on drought years, based on rain years. But this is typically what they'll do. Usually 11.5 to 12-hour length days is when they like to migrate out in the spring, and that's also about when they migrate in the fall. You know, when the water's around mid-50s, in the spring is when they'll come out, and mid-50s in the fall is when they'll go in. I touched on the crawfish, the adult ones, molting once or twice a year. That's mainly because when they come out, they're hungry, they eat a lot, they molt, and then before they get ready to go in, they're packing it down, they eat a lot, and they molt and they go back in. So the juveniles, again, once, you know, if you have clear nights, they'll molt. And then this crayfish spawn is not really what people think. You know, when you think of a bass spawning, you think of it, you know, making a nest and dropping eggs and this and that. You know, they use spawn pretty broadly, but really it's mating. You know, they have internal fertilization, and the eggs typically won't be laid until the fall and/or during the winter months, and then they'll shed them in the spring. So it's they'll mate, and the eggs will be fertilized and stay with them for 6 to 9 months. So it's not an instantaneous deal. So I touched on that. Again, you know, 11.5 to 12-hour length days in the spring, but they'll start at about 13-hour length days in the fall, a little bit earlier. Here's one in the spring with eggs. That's what they look like. They can't really swim a whole lot, but they look like a bunch of little bitty grapes. And they'll hatch, they'll hold on as long as they can until they're just too big to hold on, and then they're on their own. There's the babies right there. Little bitty guys. They look like a little shrimp, and they're just doing their thing, holding on until they get too big. So here's a picture of one molting. Notice how it doesn't change colors. It's exactly the same. Difference is it's spineless. It's just a goop just laying there, collecting calcium and hardening its shell. Usually this process takes a couple of days, and that's usually about the 3rd or 4th day after a molt. This was taken in the fall. The system I did my study on had a turnover situation where the guy was feeding, he molted, and then they started making their burrows a couple weeks later. So here's your recap, and so we'll go on to the next one here. All right, so here's the predator. Now we're at the top of the food chain. Micropterus is a scientific name, and then you have the species names. That's a genus name. You have a species name come after that. It's like our first and last name, except their last name's first. So I'm just going to touch on, there's a lot of species of bass, like red eye and Guadalupe, and you know, they all kind of compare to one of these three. So I'm just going to touch on the 3 main ones: largemouth, spotted, and smallmouth. You know, the more north you go, we're higher in elevation, the more you'll tend to have smallmouth and spotted bass, and the more south you go, or lower elevation, you'll have more largemouth bass. That's why, you know, Oneida and Champlain, even though they're far north, they're pretty low elevation, so they can be pretty productive to largemouth. This is their scientific name, Micropterus salamoides. They're less streamlined, they're more fattier and lazier, and they like backwater, more brackish water. A lot of you guys probably already know this, but if you don't, I'm including it so you can look it up, especially the scientific names. You can look up these and find all sorts of stuff, and as opposed to just typing in, you know, their common name. Again, Micropterus punctualis, if I said that right, it's a mouthful. It is like a cross between a smallmouth and a largemouth. You get more streamlined, more tendency to want to be open water, more tendency to want to school, you know, but also at times will be acting like a largemouth. A little bit more streamlined because they're schooling more. And smallmouth bass, they're just little pieces of muscle. You know, they like current. They fight hard. They like to jump. They like to be acrobatic. They're just a fish full of muscle. They like open water. They like to school. They like clear water, and they typically like to, you know, like rock. Kind of like you know, largemouth tend to prefer backwater areas. Spotted bass are kind of in between. So now I'm going to summarize this. How does this all tie together? What does this mean? And hopefully I planted some seeds to kind of get you thinking outside the box a little bit, and how this will determine, how you fish, what lure selection you have, when you select those lures, whether you're paying on a spinner bait and you're not doing it on a sunny, calm day, in the middle of summer. You're doing it when it's around a full moon and it's got some wind and you're fishing, rocky points. What you fish, again, what color you use. Just kind of exercise some common sense. Don't just throw darts. Try to think of what they're eating, why they're eating it, and don't be afraid to go to the very basic of the food chain to kickstart that. What are the Zoo-Plankton doing? What's the Phytoplankton doing? And Shad and so on. So this is, again, I'll touch base on this. We talked about the rotifers and the cyclops and how these are their first meals. So kind of, again, think outside the box. Look up Zoo-Plankton. Try to find some different pictures of Zoo-Plankton and tie up some lures that kind of look like them. There you go. Same thing with crayfish. Again, check out my 2 other webinars. Again, if you have any additional questions on those, be happy to answer them. And then in the spring, kind of help you out here, is target areas at the lowest part of the food chain has a kickstart. So when a lake's starting to warm up, those north shore, they get the most sunlight. They're going to warm up quicker, and they're going to start their cycle. And then, once that gets exploited with local fishermen, or they start going through their cycle, then start checking the south shore and kind of move down the lake in the process. And then, a couple things to key on. Focus on the shad before 55 degrees. Once you get around 55 degrees, you'll see them kind of transition to crawfish. And then, I want to point out, though, there are species of crawfish, if you're fishing around rock, that will be out year-round. So, don't be afraid to fish the crawfish pattern when it's cold. Just make sure you keep it around the rock. And then, focus on bass around 62 degrees. I say focus on the bass. It's not the forage. They're not. What I mean is they don't eat each other, but you're visibly going to be seeing them. That's when they spawn. So, get shallow. Just focus on shallow cover. Focus on their spawn. And then after 65 degrees, this is Mother Nature's way again of taking care of the fish that are a little bit tired and worn out from spawn, and the shad and the crayfish. Definitely focus on those. Summer months. So I consider the summer months when the water is greater than 75. You're going to have a lot of the fish start to move out at 75 degrees. If you put your boat in the water and it's 75 degrees, or even getting close, 73 degrees first thing in the morning, there are fish starting to show up deep. Now, what happens at 80 degrees? 80 degrees, the minimum functional oxygen requirement of a bass is the maximum sustainable yield of the water. So what that means is if you took water at 80 degrees and the way the oxygen will expand and work in that water, you're reaching the danger zone. What a bass requires, like I said about striper, he has to constantly be swimming, he requires even more. That's why they go deeper earlier. But a bass, he needs oxygen. And so when you start getting 80-degree water, they get, if they're in the backwater, they get tight. They get up on the bank. That sounds kind of backwards, but they'll get up underneath that shade. And that shade is cooler, much cooler. Or if they can't do that, or if it's open water down the lake and there's too much boat traffic gets it, they will go deep. So 80-degree water, that's the transition. That's when you just absolutely need to be looking really dirt shallow or really dirt, really, really deep. So I'm going to touch base on a thermocline. A lot of people have asked me about this one and why some lakes have them and some lakes don't. So places like, for instance, along the Tennessee River, lakes along the Tennessee River, Kentucky Lake, Pickwick, Wilson, that's backwards world. The main lake is actually the river, and then the coves are the lake. I'm not going to say the coves will never get a thermocline, but because there's so much current through the main lake itself, it just doesn't set up for it. Places like Murray, it doesn't take long, especially when there's a lack of wind or lack of current, flood control lakes, places like Douglas, there will be a thermocline. On your deeper Great Lakes, there will be a thermocline. Places like Erie, in some places like Erie, it will, but it's such a shallow lake, and wind can just really, churn that lake up. You're not going to have much of a thermocline. So what that does with the phytoplankton and zooplankton, it doesn't do much to the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton, they just grow and drift around, and as clear as the water is as clear as the phytoplankton, as deep as the phytoplankton will be. If it's 20-foot clarity, as long as it's getting light, it will be growing. The zooplankton, they don't like a whole lot of light in the heat. They'll just get cooked in a lot of cases. So, at dusk and dawn, that's why you see a lot of shad kind of popping at the surface, is that's when the zooplankton, they're also eating. So the zooplankton, at a lot of times during the day, will go as deep as it can until it starts to run out of oxygen. And that's where the thermocline layer will set up, and that's where the zooplankton will sit, and that's where the shad will sit. So that's why a lot of times you'll see that thermocline. And so you can graph it and actually see all the shad sitting at the same level. Well, if you usually see them all sitting at 20 foot, find a point that intersects that 20-foot range, and that's where you need to start. Those fish, wherever that thermocline is, if it sets up at 30 foot, you focus in that 25 to 30 foot range. If it sets up at 20 foot, focus at 15 to 20 foot range. And especially later in the summer, can especially play where there's thermoclines, where there's a lack of water and a lack of current, or lack of wind, and lack of water flow. Wind and current will help break this up. Once the fall comes around, you get a lot of that. Again, blue-green algae, if there's not a whole lot of current to break up that surface, you can get into a situation if it's a smaller lake. So if you have a pond or something, an agitator, during the summer months and into the fall is definitely a good idea. So in the fall, turnover is going to happen roughly around 55 degrees, and that's kind of the kickstart with the crayfish. Again, it's Mother Nature's way of taking care of them. It'll allow a lot of times for a shad die-off to take place, oxygen situations, and allows the crawfish to get a pretty good meal to load up on. And again, the bass kind of just follow suit. They'll go shallow, they'll scatter once turnover takes place. And, a lot of times they're likely to be, at any depth. They can be 30 foot, they can be 2 foot. So that's just a transition. When that takes place, it starts roughly around 50. It's usually in full gear by 50 degrees, once it's cooling down. And by the low 50s, mid to low 50s, as it holds there for a while, you'll have a lot more fish shallow. But, again, that's kind of the time of year that everything kind of flips around. Oxygen can be an issue. What do? Chase the wind. Chase the wind, chase the shade. Find places where there's flow coming in the backwaters. Again, right here. Follow the shad. The shad know where the oxygen is at. If you see shad, you're in where the bass are. Oxygen is key, backwaters and wind. The crawfish, they're going to sense turnover too, and a lot of times you can tell when it's happening. You can kind of see a film on the water, especially in places they're stagnant, and just keep checking that crayfish bite. If you're not seeing shad, just check the rock transitions where they're going to be moving from rock to somewhere to burrow in, and the bass will let you know real quick if that's what they're doing. They're going to eat a jig, and that's a good time of year to go fishing. Okay, so the winter, by then, thermocline's kind of gone. Now, this doesn't really apply much to people in the south. You usually don't see water this cold. But in the north, let me explain 4 degrees Celsius, which is 39.7 degrees Fahrenheit. What that is the most densest water. That water is the heaviest water among any other temperature. So if you're playing Jeopardy and that comes up, you're going to look really smart. But 30-degree water is lighter. 45-degree water is lighter. So what happens is, as the water cools, the air temperature gets less than 40 degrees. that water temperature may not drop right away because that whole column's got to cool down to 40 before allow the surface to cool down lower than that, because it keeps sinking to the bottom. It keeps stacking, keeps stacking, keeps stacking. So once you see that surface temp start to get colder than 40, then they're absolutely going to be starting to go deep. If it's warmer than 40, but you have air temperature that's really, really cold, those fish will be on the bank. You know, growing up in Indiana, that was my favorite time to go fish a jig. You know, the crayfish are still out, even a spinnerbait, the shad are up on the bank. It would be snowing, but that water would be right at 41, 42 degrees, and we'd just be smoking them because they are shallow. And then once that hits past 40, then you know that's the transition. So that brings me to my next thing, is my rule of 5. You'll notice I had a lot of numbers that ended in 5 and ended in 0. Simply put, anything that ends in 5, if you put your boat in the morning and it ends in 5, they are solid, set up, doing something. They're in the middle of a cycle. If it ends in 0, they're in transition. So that in itself can tell you what you need to do. I'm typically, unless the weather condition is cloudy and windy, I'm not going to power fish if I put the boat in the water and it ends in 0. You know, I know right away to pick up a finesse worm or slow down or whatever it may be. If it ends in a 5, they're eating somewhere. So, you know, just definitely keep that in mind. One thing I'm going to do before I go, you know, the questions here, is I wanted to show you on the Navionics. I love this web app. I play with this all the time online. If you just go to navionics.com, they got a web app here, and you have right here in the bottom left, you can use just regular Navionics or the sonar charts, and granted Navionics is putting this on, it sounds like a sales pitch, but I'm really telling you practical here what I use and how good this is. But your map options, this is just like if you're playing on your iPad or if it's in your boat. And I'll change the depth. Now it's called safety depth, but I'll use it to highlight key places. So if I'm looking for, you know, 10-foot drops in the back of pockets or whatever it may be, but I just wanted to show you, let me see here real quick. Let me make sure I can share this. New share, I'm sorry. There you go. All right, can you see that now? My apologies. So here it is now. This is what I was talking about. When you go to Navionics, website, navionics.com, this is what I was talking about, the bottom left-hand corner. Make sure you click that on sonar charts. There's the difference between Navionics and sonar charts. If you've never heard of sonar charts, it's the ability for you to record sonar and upload it into your account, into the master database. So if you live on a small lake that, you know, you find something that's not 100% accurate, you can scan it and then update your card, and then it's accurate. And then you'll have an updated chart at your fingertips. So you can actually make charts yourself by scanning a blank card and uploading it to Navionics. So here's your menu. This is what I was talking about, your map options. It's just like your iPad or your phone or your Navionics app in general. But I'll play with the safety depth, the market. So I set it at 30 foot right now, and for Murray, and so it'll help highlight in blue. Right now I'm running a lot of topwaters, so places and bars that you want to check out, normally you wouldn't even know were there. So these big long bars, these fish will live out in the summer months, and then they'll pull up shallow to shad spawn on, especially this spot. These spots are good. I don't care to share them. I got many of them. As the current comes down, it hits it directly, and these points pointing upriver. But if you were to change it to, you know, just nothing, you know, it would go away. You can see it update here. And so, you know, so definitely play with the safety depth. And like this time of year, I set it to 30. Let it load up here. But one thing I wanted to show you too is when you're looking at a lake, you can see as I'm zooming out here, I have the satellite on, same thing in the menu, but I'll zoom in and out. I'll see if I can make it do it again. Try not to make you dizzy. You see it there a second ago as it was kind of catching up to itself. There was a big mud line. Can't make it do it again. But what I try to focus on is think about every lake, for the most part, is the same. You're going to have lake fish and river fish. Like I said, Kentucky Lake's backwards world. Your river fish live in the main lake, and your lake fish live in the pockets. But you see there's a color change right in the midsection. It's usually where you see the lake start to widen, where the flow drops off. But like I said, follow the forage. Where you have less flow, more open water, you're going to have less crayfish, more shad. So you wouldn't see me, unless it was in the spring around rock transitions or boat ramps, you're not going to see me throw typically in the middle of summer or even the fall per se, crayfish patterns on the lower end of the lake, unless they're just on the bank and the crayfish are doing their thing. But year round, winter, again, I talked about that species, Orconectes. He's going to live in this river year round. And then when you get down here in open water, you kind of get into a different crawfish species. Same thing with the shad. Look for, the herring, more open areas. And when you get in these backwater areas, different times of the year, when the lake turns over, just pull this up. Look for ditches coming in, and you'll see just channel swings. Like with this highlight, like right here, I see the lines together. I know that's a bluff right there, the way the channel swings real hard. So you can see, just using, just practical common sense stuff, where the channel swings real hard, there's a channel swing. And where it transitions and you have a pocket, they're going to use that in the fall and also in the spring. So just, use that. And that's really, what I touch on, just using your Navionics to tie that in. But I will open it up to Ross. You may have seen some questions coming in as I was giving that. So if you wouldn't mind just reading off some of the questions that people might have, I'd be glad to answer them.
Well, Michael, we don't have any right now. There's always a few that come in. I know I can speak for the other guys that have watched this. It was extremely informative. So I'm sure some guys have some questions. We'll give them just a moment here to kind of, throw anything out that they've got. But right now, there isn't anything on the board. You guys can throw questions into the question and answer area or the chat area, for that matter. I can monitor both of them. But kind of one question that popped up for me, Michael, was when you were talking about the crayfish side of things. How often are you just going with a manufactured skirt from a bass company, or are you always kind of building your own skirts as you go along?
Yeah, I'm a tinkerer. I think that's just what gives me confidence. I think a lot of fishermen can attest to this, to where if you're throwing something that you have a reason to be throwing it, like I know what the crayfish color are, and it just builds your confidence that if you have, a jig, most jigs you buy off the shelf, and I use a new company called Greenfish Tackle, and I work with them developing jig colors, and they have a couple signature colors that if you call up there and ask them about, they'd be happy to tell you and share with you. But a lot of my colors, a lot of the colors you see on the shelf, they only have one or two colors because it's cost efficient in the production process. And I've learned this over the years working in the industry, doing lure designs, coming from China, wherever, use more than 3 or 4 colors. Every time somebody touches that product, it costs more money to build that thing. So they try to keep money down. So when you put more blends, like you see that one crayfish, I can go back to it. You got like 6 different colors in this one crayfish. I don't know if you see that up on your screen. So get creative. As long as it makes sense, put some green gourd in there, put some, pumpkin seeds, some green pumpkin, some red, some blue, some lavender. I mean, just get creative. And it's something that gives you confidence. At the end of the day, you can't fake confidence, and that's what catches you fish.
Well, I'm not sure that I have lavender in my boat, but I'll take your word on that one. Right now, it does appear that we don't have any questions, so we'll probably end it. But I want to let the fans out there know this is going to be up on Navionics.com in about a week. Usually, sometimes it's a little bit less than that. So if you've got friends or family members that would be into this kind of stuff, this is obviously a science side of things, but it was incredibly informative through this process. And I want to thank you, Michael, because I as a fisherman, as a junkie, myself, I tuned in and not only as a Navionics employee, but I watched it as a fisherman tonight. So I got excited about this. But you guys can see right here, Michael is open to answering your questions. You know, you can email him and you can Facebook him and things like that. So by all means do that. But you'll see this video up. And he did mention that Navionics.com has the other webinars. Michael's done a number of the crayfish webinars that were even more in depth than what he talked about here, guys. And by all means, go to Navionics.com. You scroll all the way to the bottom, and it says webinars, and you can click and look at all of them. If you're whether you're a bass fisherman or any other species of fisherman, there's webinars that fit your needs, including saltwater and all of the above. So it's been a fun process to go through all of this. But if you have anything else, Michael, please, by all means, comment.
No, that's all I've got. And guys, don't be afraid to, you know, sometimes people don't want to speak up in public. Don't be afraid to send me a personal message. You know, give me a day or so to get back with you, but I'll get back with you and answer to any detail of any questions you have.
Okay. And thank you, Michael. And also anybody that views this, you can go to Michael at michaelmurphyfishing.com if you are interested in a guide trip on Murray. Michael, I will tell you, if I was going to be in South Carolina anytime soon, I'd make you take me out, and I'd make you give me a deal as a Navionics employee. But
not a problem.
Everybody else, check it out. It's a wonderful experience. I have had the privilege of being on the water with Michael in the past, so it was a totally enjoyable experience. So I recommend it. But thank you for your time tonight, and everybody, I appreciate you tuning in. And with that, everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.